Hello, and it's Andy again, and this is episode 2 of my personal journey through the genre post rock, highlighting 5 bands that encapsulate the breadth of this genre to me. Now, lots of people, what the hell is post rock? Well, it's lots of things to different people, and many people don't think it's a proper genre at all. It's just a catch-all. Most of the bands that get tagged with the title post rock actually don't really recognise it themselves. You get fans of individual bands, and this particularly applies to the one I did last week, Sigur Rós, who don't really recognise it, and certainly their later work probably is less post rock than their earlier stuff. To me, it's so there are some similarities in the nature of it. So it's typically, or the songs I should say, are typically, though not exclusively, instrumental. Quite often the vocals are almost more of an instrument themselves than the actual lyrics necessarily. It tends to be quite guitar heavy or guitar based. And there's a great deal of variety in terms of the relative heaviness of it, or the sort of more instrumental, almost sometimes moving into slight ambient, though ambience isn't something you would typically think of as post rock. Again, some commonality of the song, the nature of the songs is there is usually, but again, not exclusively, sort of quiet patches and large and loud or intense patches. There tends to be a sort of crescendo moment at some point in the tracks. It does vary though, obviously. And another common theme is a slightly bonkers thing, and in that the naming of tracks is very often slightly weird, shall we say. This band, episode 2, is really the second band I got into, and sort of whilst the genre has been going since, well, arguably since the late 80s, but in terms of this, what we think of today as post rock, it's really sort of the late 90s onwards, and I sort of got into it really in the early 2000s. So 2002 was the first one I got with Sigur Rós, which is why I did that last week, and really it's into the mid 2000s when I really began to pick up on this as a genre, and that was with the band Mogwai. And as I go through these, I'm picking out predominantly the album which got me into them, and it's not necessarily one I think is their best. Very rarely their first, because it's often later on that I got into it. So today, I'm going to pick up on Mogwai and their album Mr. Beast 2006, which is the first one I got into of theirs, and initially the CD. I've since found the vinyl, and going through, over the years, as I found vinyl examples, usually reissues, and at a reasonable price, I've picked them up. I'm missing 2 at the moment. I'll come to that later on. So, Mr. Beast is if I was doing a ranking the studio albums, which I might do sometime, this wouldn't be right up this would be somewhere in the middle towards the back end. It's a great album, but all their albums are brilliant in my humble. But this, it sort of typifies that mid period. So this was their 5th studio album out of 10 they've done. Like most of the bands, they tended to be a bit weighted towards the beginning of it, and then there have been bigger gaps between the later albums. This is as a vinyl album. It's got 3 sides on it, so it's one of those ones where the 4th side is etched. And you really need to pay attention not to damage your stylus. I have done that once. There are 9 tracks. No, sorry, I tell a lie. 10 tracks on the album. 3 real standout. I mean, the whole album is good, but there are 3 real standout tracks on here. All of which are pretty well staples of their live sets. So on side A, you've got Glasgow Mega Snake. well, yeah, bonkers track titles. Side B, Friend of the Night. And on side C, the last track on there, what I think is a delightfully Scottish sounding We're No Here. And that We're No Here is a real, it's far from their best track ever, but it really encapsulates that sort of central crescendo nature that you sometimes get with post rock, where it builds up from a fairly quiet start to a really big bombastic middle, and then tails off towards the end with a more gentle outro. So it's a great album, and I love it. And over the years, and this really cemented me thinking I really like this, and I began to sort of explore further, which we come to some of the other bands that I've got. And over the last, should we say, the last 15 years particularly, I've collected quite a lot of albums, an awful lot of digital MP3s, CDs, etc. But for the bands I like most, I've tried to build up on vinyl. I mentioned about the live sound. One thing Mogwai are, in some ways, they're sort of more at the heavier end, shall we say, and the louder end of the genre. But they're a really good live band. And in 2010, which would have been around probably just after trying to think now, their eighth, no, earlier than that, probably their seventh album. Yeah, seventh album. So produced, I think, 3 since then. They produced a live album called Special Moves, which was recorded in Brooklyn, New York, in 2009, and this is a sort of CD and DVD. So there's a sort of video of the gig. The CD has got 11 tracks on it, including those 3 I mentioned. And it is, if you like Mogwai, it is an essential because it's up to that point, it's an absolute greatest hits. And they've got some. I mean, just picking up some of the tracks on here. You've got Friend of the Night, which I mentioned just now. It kicks off with the wonderfully titled "I'm Jim Morrison, I'm Dead." Mogwai Fear Satan, which actually is my favourite track of all times. And I did see them in about 2015, and they didn't play that. Oh. I Love You, I'm Going to Blow Up Your School, Like Herod, so it goes on. All these tracks are absolutely brilliant if you're into this sort of thing. Bonkers titles, but that's a real great live. One of my top 5 live albums, and I've got a few. I like a live album. Recently, they did. Their last album came out in 21, I think. It's not that long ago. And it's I forgot what it's called now. As the Love Continues, a double. Again, some great tracks up there. Ceiling Granny is my favourite, and it actually made #1 in the album chart, which post rock you don't usually get that. Great album, like they all are, and. In 2015, to celebrate, because I think they sort of, I think that's when they started as a band. It wasn't when they possibly produced their first EP. I think the first album was Young Team, which I only have on CD. I have all their 10 studio albums on vinyl, other than their first 2. Young Team is the first and my favourite of their albums, so that's one of those unusual ones where the band's first album is the best and all the others are cracking too. And Come On Die Young, which is abbreviated to Cody for the title track. But I finally found these on vinyl. They are actually reissuing them in February this year. I discovered that, so I pre-ordered those. So in about another month's time, I will be complete in terms of my vinyl, which I'm good at. Anyway, back to their 20-year anniversary, 2015. They produced a compilation of their great tracks up until that point, and bearing in mind that they had at that stage produced eight of their studio albums, so it's only the last two which were missing. And I've got the box set in vinyl. It's called Central Belters, and there are 6 LPs on that. And I looked the other day. I was I was cataloguing some stuff on Discogs, and when I looked at this one, I bought this at the time from Amazon, and it was £50, which I thought was reasonable at the time, for 6 LPs. Now, if you look on Discogs, it's nearer 200 to buy. Obviously, the second-hand ones now. Some are supposedly mint, but nevertheless, it's a lot of money. And that's when I saw them. So they did their sort of greatest hits tour at that stage, and it was great to see them. There's a Roundhouse in London. As I say, they didn't necessarily play quite as many of their greatest hits that I would have liked, but it's good to see them anyway. So that's Mogwai. Props at the heavier end of the sort of genre post rock, real classic ones on there. They do some singing sometimes, unlike many of the bands. And next time for episode 3, I'm going to pick the third band, and here we leave Europe. So we've done Iceland and we've done Scotland, and we head across to the other side of the world, and Japan, and to pick up the Japanese band Mono. And Mono, a great band, again quite guitar heavy, but not in nothing like heavy in the sense of say Mogwai. It's much more. I use the term symphonic. No, they do like an orchestra, and I'll come to that next time. But very instrumental. Brilliant band. Again, another one who hate the term post rock and don't recognise themselves as it. But in the broad church that is post rock, in my opinion, they are, and they're a great band. Many people haven't heard of them because they don't necessarily always pick up on Japanese music. And there's some great bands, and this is one of them. So I hope that was vaguely interesting, and next time look forward to talking about Mono. Cheers.